Hey everyone, and welcome. Tonight, let's step away from the noise of the present and wander into the life of a figure from history, exploring those pivotal moments that truly defined their place in time. When we think of the first Roman emperor, Augustus, we often picture grand monuments and sweeping reforms. But behind the marble facade of his reign stood a woman of immense, if quiet, influence, Livia Drusilla. Was she merely the dutiful wife, the ideal empress, or was she one of the chief architects of the new Roman order? That's the quiet question we'll explore together over the next little while. If you enjoy these late-night journeys into the past, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider liking this video and subscribing. And I always love to see where you're listening from, so feel free to leave a comment down below. For now, maybe dim the lights just a little more. Let's begin to trace the remarkable path of the woman who would become the trusted advisor to an emperor. The Rome that Livia was born into, in the year 58 BC, was not the stable, majestic empire we often imagine. It was a city, and a republic, tearing itself apart. The air was thick with conspiracy, the streets were stained by the blood of political rivals, and the foundational principles of the Republic were crumbling under the weight of ambitious generals and their loyal armies. This was a world of brutal, zero-sum politics, where a single misstep, a poorly chosen allegiance, could mean exile or death not just for you, but for your entire family. Livia was a daughter of the Claudii, one of Rome's oldest and proudest patrician families. It was a lineage that carried immense prestige, a name that resonated with centuries of Roman tradition and aristocratic hauteur. Her upbringing would have been steeped in the values of duty, discipline, and a profound understanding of the intricate dance of Roman politics. She learned from a young age that power was not always wielded in the open forum or on the battlefield. It was often cultivated in the quiet, firelit rooms of villas, in whispered conversations and strategic alliances. Her first marriage was a product of this world. She was wed to her cousin, Tiberius Claudius Nero, a man of respectable standing and a fervent supporter of the Republican cause. This allegiance placed them squarely in opposition to the rising star of the age, a young man named Octavian. Octavian, the great-nephew and adopted son of the assassinated Julius Caesar, was playing a dangerous and brilliant game to avenge his father and seize control of the Roman state. In the civil war that followed, Livia's husband chose the losing side. He stood with Mark Antony and Octavian's other rivals. This meant that Livia, still just a teenager and now a young mother to a son, also named Tiberius, found herself on the run. The stories paint a vivid picture of a perilous flight, of a young noblewoman forced to abandon her home, traveling in disguise, clutching her infant son, to escape the proscriptions and purges of the victorious faction. It was a harsh and terrifying introduction to the realities of power. This experience didn't just teach her about loss, it taught her about survival. It forged in her a pragmatism and a steely resolve that would define the rest of her life. She learned, in the most visceral way possible, what it meant to be on the wrong side of history, and it was a lesson she would never forget. And then, in a turn of events that feels more like political theater than historical fact, everything changed. After a general amnesty was declared, Livia and her husband were able to return to Rome. It was here, in the year 39 BC, that she met Octavian. The historical accounts of this meeting are sparse, but the outcome was immediate and decisive. Octavian, who was already married to a woman named Scribonia, was captivated by Livia's beauty, intelligence, and her formidable patrician bearing. But this was far more than a simple infatuation. Octavian was a master strategist, and in Livia, he saw not just a desirable wife, but a crucial political asset. Marrying a Claudian would be a masterstroke. It would link his relatively new, Caesarian faction to one of the most ancient and respected bloodlines of the Old Republic. It was a gesture of reconciliation, a symbol that he was not merely a warlord, but a unifier who could bridge the old world and the new. For Livia, the calculation was just as clear, if perhaps more perilous. To align herself with Octavian meant abandoning her husband and the republican ideals he stood for. It meant stepping into the very heart of the power she had so recently fled. The decision was swift and ruthless. Octavian divorced Scribonia, reputedly on the very day she gave birth to their daughter, Julia. Livia, who was 6 months pregnant with her second son, was divorced from her husband. They were married just 3 days later. Her former husband was even obliged to attend the wedding feast and give her away, a moment of profound public and personal humiliation that underscored the absolute power Octavian now wielded. This marriage was not a romance, it was the founding of a dynasty. It was a merger, a political pact sealed at the highest level, and it would form the bedrock of the new imperial family and, by extension, the new Roman state. Once installed in Octavian's home on the Palatine Hill, a dwelling that was intentionally modest to project an image of a man of the people, Livia began to cultivate her unique position of influence. Her role was not to be a silent, decorative partner. She immediately established herself as the domina, the mistress of the household. In the context of the nascent imperial court, this was no small domestic task. The household of the princeps, or first citizen, as Augustus would come to be known, was a sprawling enterprise. It was the nerve center of his political network, managing vast properties, finances, a huge staff of slaves and freedmen, and a constant stream of political visitors and petitioners. To run this domain efficiently, with discretion and without scandal, was to demonstrate the very same virtues Augustus wanted to project onto the state itself: order, discipline, and traditional Roman morality. Livia excelled at this. She managed the complex administration with a quiet, firm hand, earning a reputation for prudence and formidable organizational skill. But her influence extended far deeper than household management. Augustus, for all his authority, was a man who understood the value of counsel, and he quickly came to rely on Livia as his most trusted confidant. This was highly unusual in Roman society, where wives were expected to remain in the domestic sphere, far from the serious business of politics and statecraft. Yet ancient sources, even those hostile to her, confirmed that Augustus regularly discussed matters of state with Livia. The historian Suetonius tells us that when Augustus had a particularly complex issue to consider, he would write down his points and prepare notes before discussing it with her, so that their conversation could be as productive as possible. This was not the idle chatter of a husband and wife, this was the work of a political partnership. She became his sounding board, a private advisor whose loyalty was beyond question. In a world teeming with ambitious senators, plotting rivals, and fair-weather friends, Livia offered something precious, a completely secure and intelligent perspective, unclouded by personal ambition for public office. Her only ambition was tied directly to his success and the stability of their family. She understood, with perfect clarity, the precariousness of their position and the necessity of maintaining a flawless public image. While Augustus was methodically dismantling the remnants of the Republic and concentrating power in his own hands, Livia was engaged in a parallel project, crafting the public persona of the ideal Roman woman. She became the living embodiment of the mos maiorum, the revered ways of the ancestors. In an age of perceived moral decay, she presented a stark contrast. She dressed modestly, without extravagant jewelry. She was famously depicted as being personally involved in spinning and weaving the wool for her husband's clothes, a powerful symbol of traditional matronly virtue, harking back to the legendary wives of the early Republic. This was not simply a personal preference, it was a carefully calibrated political statement. Every aspect of her public life was designed to reinforce the official narrative of the Augustan regime, a return to peace, prosperity, and old-fashioned morality after a century of chaos and civil war. She was the calm, stable, and virtuous center of the new order, the mother of the imperial household, and by extension, the symbolic mother of the restored state. This foundation of trust, administrative competence, and shared political ideology, built over decades in the quiet of their home, made Livia not just the wife of an emperor, but an indispensable architect of his reign. Her power was not inscribed on any law, but it was felt in every major decision that shaped the Roman Empire. For any ruler, the question of what comes next, of who will inherit the power and continue the legacy, is the most critical and often the most perilous. For Augustus, it was a problem of almost impossible delicacy. He had spent decades carefully constructing a political fiction, the idea that he had not destroyed the Roman Republic, but had restored it. He was not a king, he insisted, merely the princeps, the first among equals. There was no formal, hereditary title to pass on. Therefore, securing a successor couldn't be a simple matter of proclamation. It had to be managed through a subtle and complex web of adoptions, marriages, and the granting of specific powers, all designed to groom an heir apparent without ever officially calling him one. His entire life's work, the peace and stability he had forged from the ashes of civil war, depended on a smooth transition. And Augustus, a man who cherished his own bloodline, had a very clear vision for who should follow him. That vision did not initially include Livia's sons. The first great hope was Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, the son of his beloved sister, Octavia. Young, handsome, and popular with the people of Rome, Marcellus was the embodiment of the Julian family's future. To cement his position, Augustus married him to his only child, Julia. All signs pointed to Marcellus as the chosen one. He was paraded before the public, granted honors far beyond his years, and was clearly being prepared for a great destiny. And then, in 23 BC, tragedy struck. Marcellus fell ill with a fever and died. He was just 19 years old. The city mourned, and Augustus was said to be inconsolable. His first, carefully laid plan for the future of Rome had dissolved into grief. For Livia, watching from the heart of the imperial family, it was a stark reminder of how fragile such plans could be, how quickly fate, or illness, could alter the political landscape. After the death of Marcellus, Augustus turned to his oldest and most trusted friend, the brilliant general Marcus Agrippa. Agrippa was married to the now widowed Julia, a union that proved incredibly fruitful. They had 5 children, and Augustus's hopes for the succession were reborn in 2 of their sons, Gaius and Lucius. Here, at last, was the perfect solution. They were his own grandsons, direct descendants of his Julian bloodline. In 17 BC, in a grand public ceremony, Augustus formally adopted the 2 boys as his own sons. They became Gaius Caesar and Lucius Caesar. From that moment on, they were the undisputed heirs of the Roman world. Nothing was spared in their education and preparation. They were taught by the finest tutors, introduced to the Senate, and sent on diplomatic missions. Their faces appeared on coinage, their names were included in public prayers. They were the golden boys of the new age, and all of Rome watched them, knowing they were looking at the future. Now, place yourself in this situation. Imagine you are Livia. You are the emperor's wife, his most intimate advisor. You share his bed, his home, his political burdens. And every day, you watch him lavish his affection and his hopes on 2 boys who are not yours. You, a Claudian, have given him no children of your own, a quiet but persistent source of sorrow in your long marriage. But you have 2 sons from your first husband, 2 brilliant and capable young men. There is your eldest, Tiberius, a man of quiet, almost grim, competence. He is arguably the best military commander Rome has. While the teenage Gaius and Lucius are being celebrated in the capital, Tiberius is on the frontiers in Germany and Pannonia, fighting brutal wars, securing the borders of the empire your husband rules, and earning the respect of the legions. Then there is your younger son, Drusus, charismatic and popular, also a gifted general. They are the sons who do the hard, bloody work of empire, yet in the grand plan of succession, they are merely secondary figures, placeholders at best. What do you do? Open rebellion is unthinkable. A public show of resentment would be political suicide for both you and your sons. So you play the long game. You counsel patience. You advise Tiberius to be the loyal soldier, the dutiful stepson. You encourage Drusus to win glory for Rome in his own right. You present to Augustus and to the world a face of unwavering support for his choices. You are the perfect Roman matron, celebrating the honors bestowed upon your stepsons, Gaius and Lucius, showing no trace of jealousy or ambition. You watch as your own son, Tiberius, is married to the emperor's daughter Julia, a prestigious match to be sure, but one that only makes him a temporary guardian of the Julian line, a regent for the true heirs. You understand that in the treacherous currents of Roman politics, the most powerful move is often to appear to do nothing at all, to wait, to be ready, and to let the overextended plans of others simply fail. And fail they did, in a series of tragedies that, for Livia's ambitions, were astonishingly convenient. First came the death of her own younger son, Drusus, in 9 BC. He fell from his horse while on campaign in Germany, and a promising career was cut short. It was a genuine and devastating blow for Livia, but in the cold calculus of power, it simplified things. Now, all her formidable focus, all her strategic energy, could be directed toward one goal, the advancement of Tiberius. Then, the Julian heirs themselves began to falter. The two boys, raised as princes, were perhaps not as resilient as Tiberius, who had been hardened by war and political adversity. In the year 2 AD, Lucius Caesar, while on a mission to Spain, fell ill and died in Massilia, modern-day Marseille. Just 18 months later, his elder brother, Gaius, was campaigning in the east. While besieging a town in Armenia, he was wounded. The wound festered, his health failed, and he died on his way back to Rome. He was 23. Within the space of a few years, Augustus's entire succession plan, so carefully constructed around his grandsons, lay in ruins. He was an old man now, weary from a lifetime of rule, and he had outlived every heir of his own blood. The historian Tacitus, writing a century later, would famously insinuate that these timely deaths were not all accidental, that Livia's hand was moving silently in the shadows, clearing a path for her son. There is no proof, no evidence at all to support such a claim. It may well have been nothing more than a series of unfortunate illnesses and accidents, common enough in the ancient world. But the outcome was undeniable. The field was now clear. There was only one man left with the experience, the military authority, and the proximity to power to take over. And so, in the year 4 AD, a grieving and reluctant Augustus finally did what Livia had been working towards for decades. He formally adopted Tiberius as his son. At the same time, he forced Tiberius to adopt his own nephew, Germanicus, the popular son of the late Drusus. Augustus was still trying to ensure a Julian connection for the next generation. But for now, the primary goal was achieved. Livia, the mother, had outmaneuvered, outlasted, and outlived all her rivals. Through a combination of patience, strategic counsel, and what can only be described as extraordinary luck, she had placed her son at the right hand of the emperor, making him the sole heir to the Roman world. Her blueprint for the succession was, at last, complete. After securing her son's place as heir, Livia's position might have seemed unassailable, but she never rested. Her final, and perhaps greatest, project was the perfection of her own image, the cementing of her role as the ideal Roman matron, the symbolic mother of the entire empire. This was not an act of personal vanity, it was the capstone of the Augustan political program. Augustus had risen to power not just as a military victor, but as a moral reformer. He passed a series of laws, the Leges Julii, aimed at restoring what he saw as the decaying moral fabric of Rome. These laws encouraged marriage, penalized adultery, and offered rewards to families who produced numerous children. It was an attempt to legislate a return to the old ways, the mos maiorum, after a century of civil war and perceived decadence. But laws alone are not enough. A leader needs a symbol, a living example of the virtues they wished to promote. Livia became that symbol. Her entire public life was a masterclass in political branding. In a city where the elite often flaunted their wealth with extravagant parties, opulent villas, and exotic luxuries, Livia cultivated an image of austere simplicity. Her home on the Palatine Hill, while elegant, was notably modest compared to the palaces of other powerful figures. Her clothing was simple, avoiding the vibrant silks and elaborate jewelry that were fashionable at the time. She chose instead the traditional garments of a respectable Roman matron, projecting an aura of dignified conservatism. The most famous element of this carefully constructed persona was her dedication to domestic crafts. The story that she personally spun and wove the wool to make Augustus's togas was repeated throughout the empire. Whether she truly spent her days at the loom is less important than the message it sent. The Empress, the most powerful woman in the world, was dedicated to the same humble, virtuous tasks as the legendary wives of Rome's heroic past. It was a powerful piece of theatre, presenting her as the ultimate Domina and Univira, a woman devoted to one man and one household, at a time when Augustus was punishing public female figures who defied these very norms, including his own daughter, Julia. Through this relentless performance of virtue, Livia provided the moral justification for the new regime. She was the calm, stable, and unimpeachable heart of the imperial family. While Augustus was the pater patriae, the father of the fatherland, she became its unofficial mater patriae, the mother. Her quiet dignity stood in stark contrast to the memory of other powerful women of the era. Women like Fulvia, Mark Antony's wife, who had raised armies and engaged in open political warfare, or Cleopatra, the foreign queen whose allure was portrayed as a corrupting threat to Roman manhood. Livia pioneered a new model for female influence. She demonstrated that a woman could wield immense power not by adopting the aggressive tactics of a man, but by perfecting the idealized role of a woman within the traditional Roman system. Her influence was exercised privately, in her counsel to Augustus, and publicly, through her flawless example. This made her power not only acceptable but celebrated in a deeply patriarchal society. She was not a threat to the established order, she was its greatest champion. The state, in turn, showered her with honors that were unprecedented for a woman. She was granted her own circle of official friends and clients, allowing her to dispense patronage like a powerful nobleman. More significantly, she was given sacrosanct titles, the same legal protection enjoyed by the tribunes of the plebs. This meant that to verbally insult or physically harm her was a religious crime against the state. It elevated her beyond the status of a mere citizen to a sacrosanct symbol of the regime. After Augustus died in 14 AD, his will revealed the final step in her elevation. He formally adopted her into his own Julian family, and she was granted the new, revered title of Augusta. She was no longer just Livia, of the Claudian house, she was Julia Augusta, a full member of the dynasty she had helped create. She lived on for another 15 years into her son Tiberius's reign, a formidable dowager empress, a living link to the deified Augustus. Her influence, though sometimes clashing with her now emperor son, remained immense. Decades later, her grandson, the Emperor Claudius, would complete her journey. He had the Senate formally deify her, and she became Diva Augusta, the divine Augusta. The woman who began life as a refugee fleeing a civil war ended it as a goddess of the Roman state, her image worshipped at altars across the empire she had so subtly, yet so profoundly, helped to shape. Her long life, spanning nearly 90 years, had been a quiet revolution. She had witnessed the death of the Republic and navigated the birth of the empire, not as a passive observer, but as a key architect. The story of Livia Augusta is a testament to the power of patience, the force of strategic thinking, and the profound influence that can be wielded from the shadows. She defined the role of the empress for centuries to come, creating a template of quiet dignity and behind-the-scenes influence that many would try, but few would manage, to replicate. The peace of the Augustan age, the Pax Romana, was built on laws and legions, but it was also built on the image of virtue, stability, and tradition that she so perfectly embodied. And so, the story of the first Augusta comes to a gentle close. The echoes of her influence, the whispers of her counsel to Augustus, the carefully crafted image of the perfect Roman matron, they all eventually fade into the long twilight of history. Her era, an age of profound transformation, gives way to new emperors, new challenges, new forms of power. The marble statues may weather, and the gold inscriptions may dull, but the foundational stability she helped to build endured for generations. As the night deepens around us, we can let these complex histories settle. The political maneuvering, the family tragedies, the quiet triumphs, they all find their place in the vast, silent library of the past. Her story reminds us that history is not only made in the noise of battle or the proclamations of emperors, but also in the steady, patient, and determined heart of a woman who understood power better than almost anyone. Let the memory of her long and remarkable journey be a gentle companion, as you two now turn towards rest.